Really excited. I mean, I've been praying for this my entire life.
Wow.
You know, I came up under the late, great Mr. John Singleton, who did Boys
Yes,
in the Hood,
yes.
so many iconic movies, and he was always a champion of mine, always encouraging me.
For 6 years, he embodied one of television's most morally corrupt characters, Franklin Saint, a drug dealer who manipulated, murdered, and destroyed everyone around him. And the role was destroying Damson Idris himself. In interviews, he admitted something that shocked people. He couldn't separate the character from himself. He was having nightmares. He was unable to look at his reflection without seeing Franklin staring back. He considered walking away from the role multiple times, but every time he tried to leave, something pulled him back. At one point, the psychological weight became so severe that he had to make a choice that would change everything. What that choice was, and what it cost him, is a story about the price of playing evil when you're trying to prove you're good. Before we dive in, if this kind of story moves you, take a second to subscribe to The Untold Story and hit the bell. We cover the real stories behind famous lives, the ones that go deeper than any headline ever will. Now let's get into it. Damson Idris grew up in Peckham, South London, not as a character study, not as inspiration for a role, but as a lived reality where the statistics were not abstract. They were neighbors, they were friends, they were the boys he played with who didn't make it out. The neighborhood had a particular logic. You either escaped or you didn't. And the difference between those two outcomes was rarely about talent or intelligence. It was about luck, timing, and an obsession so complete it consumed everything else. Acting became that obsession for Damson Idris. Not a hobby, not a side interest, a religion, a desperate belief that if he could just get good enough, just get seen by the right person, just land one role that mattered, he could leave Peckham behind and never look back. He pursued it with the kind of intensity that comes from understanding the alternative. For years, he auditioned. He was rejected. He was told repeatedly that he didn't quite fit, that he needed to be different, that he should try something else before the reality of his failed dreams caught up with him. And then, at a moment when he was genuinely considering quitting, when the rejections had accumulated to a weight that felt unbearable, Snowfall came. The script arrived. He read Franklin Saint's character description and immediately understood something about the role that most actors might have missed. Franklin wasn't a villain designed to be hated. He was a fully realized human being, ambitious, intelligent, charming, and absolutely ruthless. The character was written with such psychological depth that playing him wouldn't feel like performing evil. It would feel like understanding it. For season 1, Damson Idris approached the role with professional distance. This was a character. This was a job. When the cameras stopped, he could step away and return to being himself. He had studied acting. He knew the difference between performance and reality. Or at least, he thought he did. By the end of season 1, he realized something had shifted in ways he couldn't articulate. The character had begun to settle into his body differently. In conversations off-set, he found himself thinking like Franklin, understanding Franklin's logic, defending Franklin's choices with an understanding that felt too authentic to be performance. And that's when the real problem started. Season 2 arrived, and with it came something Damson Idris had not anticipated. Franklin Saint had stopped being a role he played and had become a consciousness he inhabited. The distinction matters because it means the character was no longer something he could step away from when the cameras turned off. Franklin was now something that lived inside him, something that leaked into his thoughts without permission. He began experiencing nightmares. Not nightmares about Franklin, nightmares as Franklin, from Franklin's perspective, living out Franklin's anxieties and Franklin's moral justifications for acts that in real life would be unconscionable. He would wake up gasping, and for several seconds, there would be a disorientation where he couldn't remember if the thoughts he'd been having in the dream were his or Franklin's. He couldn't look at mirrors without experiencing a moment of psychological vertigo. For a split second before his mind recognized him, he would see Franklin's expression staring back at him. He would see Franklin's hardness in his own eyes. He would see the character's moral calculus reflected in his own face. His family noticed. They said he was different, darker. There was a weight in his presence that hadn't been there before, a heaviness in how he moved through the world, a distance in how he interacted with people he loved. They didn't understand what was happening, and honestly, neither did Damson Idris himself. In interviews, he tried to explain it to journalists who wanted to understand the method behind his brilliant performance, but the language kept failing him. How do you explain to someone that a character has begun to colonize your consciousness? How do you describe the experience of waking up unable to distinguish between your own thoughts and the thoughts of a fictional person? He made a critical decision at this moment, a decision that would trap him for the next 4 years. He decided that if he couldn't escape Franklin, then he would lean deeper into understanding him. If the character was going to invade his mind, then Damson would gain control by understanding every aspect of Franklin's psychology. He believed, with the kind of logic that desperation creates, that understanding evil would give him power over it. What he didn't understand was that understanding evil doesn't give you power over it. It gives evil a foothold in your mind. It transforms the character from something external that you perform into something internal that performs you. After season 1, there were opportunities to leave. Other roles offered themselves. Film opportunities, chances to step away and build a different kind of career. But Snowfall had become successful, critically acclaimed. The show that was finally making Damson Idris visible as an actor, The Escape from Peckham, was actually working. How could he abandon Franklin Saint when the character was the vehicle of his freedom? So he stayed. Season 2 arrived, and with it came Franklin's first major betrayal of someone who trusted him. Damson found himself in interviews defending Franklin's logic, understanding the character's reasoning, explaining why the betrayal made sense from Franklin's perspective. And the terrifying part was that the understanding felt genuine, not performed. Season 3 came, and Franklin murdered someone, not in a moment of passion or self-defense, but as a calculated decision, as a demonstration of power. As Damson prepared for those scenes, he researched how people justify killing. He studied the psychological framework that allows someone to commit murder and then go home to their family. He internalized that framework so completely that when he performed the scenes, the authenticity was undeniable. But authenticity has a cost. Season 4 arrived, and Franklin began destroying his own family. By now, Damson was experiencing something that he barely admitted in therapy. He was losing the ability to separate his own moral framework from Franklin's. He would make decisions in his real life and realize he was making them using Franklin's logic. He would interact with people and realize he was using Franklin's manipulation tactics without intending to. Season 5 came, and Franklin became irredeemable. The character had moved so far into darkness that there was no redemption arc available, no moment where audiences could see him return to humanity. He was gone, fully consumed by his own ambitions, his own violence, his own moral bankruptcy. And Damson Idris was beginning to fear that he had followed Franklin all the way into that darkness. Between seasons 5 and 6, Damson made a public admission that shocked people who knew him only through his social media presence or his interviews. He said that he had considered quitting the show. He had contemplated walking away from Snowfall entirely because he was afraid of what the role was doing to him. He described moments where he would catch himself in conversations adopting Franklin's behavioral patterns. The manipulation, the justification of harm, the rationalization of choices that couldn't be rationalized. He was afraid that 6 years of embodying a character this dark meant something permanent had changed in his neurology, in his psychology, in the fundamental way he understood morality. His therapist had asked him a question that haunted him between those seasons. What if you can't separate from this character the way you think you can? And that question forced him to stand at a crossroads. He could continue with season 6, knowing that another year inside Franklin Saint's consciousness might be the year he couldn't find his way back out. or he could walk away, abandoning the role that had defined his entire career, rejecting the opportunity that had finally made him visible to the world. He stood at that crossroads and made a decision. He chose to return for season 6, but he did it differently than he had done the previous 5 seasons. Instead of resisting the character, instead of trying to maintain distance while being pulled deeper, he committed to understanding Franklin completely. Not as a way to control him, but as a way to create consciousness about what was happening. He read about trauma. He studied psychology. He learned about moral injury, the specific damage that comes from witnessing or committing acts that violate your core values. By understanding Franklin's trauma, understanding how Franklin's childhood wounds had created the violence in his adulthood, Damson began to separate from the character in a paradoxical way. He could play Franklin with complete authenticity, while simultaneously maintaining compassion for the damaged person that Franklin had become. In the final season, something shifted visibly in the performance. Franklin Saint was no longer a character that owned Damson Idris. Damson had taken ownership of Franklin. He understood the character so completely that he could portray him without being consumed by him. It was the inverse of everything he had tried in the previous 5 seasons. Instead of resisting, he embraced. Instead of maintaining distance, he moved closer. Instead of trying to separate, he accepted the connection. And in accepting it, he found the boundary he had been searching for the entire time. By the time Snowfall ended, Damson Idris had spent 6 years inside a character's consciousness. 6 years of nightmares. 6 years of looking in mirrors and seeing someone else's face. 6 years of having his own morality challenged and questioned by the depth of Franklin Saint's justifications for harm. He had emerged on the other side of that experience changed. Not destroyed, as he had feared, changed in a way that was actually deepening rather than diminishing. Playing Franklin Saint had taught him something that no other experience could have, that understanding evil requires understanding compassion, that embodying darkness requires you to understand light in a way that surface-level goodness never could. That 6 years of being Franklin Saint had actually taught him more about his own morality than any other experience in his life. In interviews after the show ended, he spoke about the psychological toll with a clarity that suggested he had truly processed it. He talked about the nightmares stopping. He talked about being able to look in mirrors again without that moment of disorientation. He talked about the weight lifting, not because the experience hadn't happened, but because he had integrated it. He had learned that the character had changed him, but not in the way he had feared. Franklin Saint had not consumed Damson Idris. Instead, Franklin Saint had become a part of his psychological architecture, a reference point for understanding human darkness that would inform every role he took afterward. The question that remained, the one that Damson Idris himself couldn't fully answer, was whether he had completely separated from Franklin Saint or whether separation was even possible. Once you've spent 6 years inhabiting a character's consciousness, once you've understood evil from the inside, can you ever fully return to your pre-character self? The answer, it seemed, was that you don't return. You integrate. You carry the character with you, but you carry it consciously rather than being carried by it unconsciously. You understand the person you were before the role and the person you became during it, and you exist somewhere in the middle now, expanded by the experience rather than diminished by it. Damson Idris chose to play evil for 6 years, and what he discovered was that playing evil authentically required him to access empathy, to understand the psychological wounds that create violence, to see the humanity in the inhumanity. That paradox, that playing evil required supreme understanding of humanity, was perhaps the most profound thing the experience taught him. Damson Idris played Franklin Saint for 6 seasons. He had nightmares. He couldn't look at mirrors. He considered quitting. He was afraid that the character had permanently changed him in ways he couldn't undo. What he discovered was that the character did change him permanently. But the change wasn't damage. It was depth. It was the kind of expansion that comes from understanding something you never wanted to understand. It was the unexpected gift hidden inside the weight. What part of Damson Idris's story moved you most? His willingness to play morally complex characters, his honesty about the psychological cost, or his commitment to finishing what he started despite the toll? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if this story resonated with you, check out our other videos about actors who sacrificed their mental health for iconic roles on The Untold Story. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story that deserves to be told.